One of the things that we learn in 1 Corinthians 13 is there are three great Christian virtues: faith, hope, and love. And that the greatest of these is love. It's interesting, of the three, hope is the one we probably talk about the least. But one of the things it says in Colossians chapter 1 is he's commending the Colossians on their faith and on their love, and he says that their faith and their love spring from the hope that they have in the gospel. I think the idea of hope is actually very central to who we are. Love may be the final and highest fulfillment of our walk with Christ, but hope is in many ways the beginning and the fuel from which everything else comes. Similarly, when in 1 Thessalonians, Paul is writing to the church in chapter 1, he talks about the different roles faith, hope, and love play, and he associates hope with endurance. Hope is the thing that's going to allow you, when things are difficult, when times are hard, to persevere and to keep going and to keep trusting. Well, I think it's extremely exciting that we have come to this chapter in the book of Revelation. Chapter 21, we're going to look at the first 5 verses of chapter 22 as well, because this is the account of the new heavens and the new earth, and this is the hope that we have been called to. When we talk about the gospel, the resurrection of Jesus Christ is central and always has to be central to our proclamation of the gospel. If you go back and you look at the book of Acts and you look at what was preached as the early church went out to the nations telling them the good news, over and over again they come back to the claim that Jesus Christ is risen and that he is alive. Well, why is it that his resurrection is so central to the gospel and so central to our hope? It is because his resurrection is the first fruits of something that is going to happen to all of his brothers and sisters, that is the church, and in fact, ultimately to the whole earth on the day when Jesus Christ returns. Think about Jesus' resurrection body for just a second. When Jesus was raised from the dead and he would meet up with his disciples, sometimes they didn't recognize him at first, but then all of a sudden they knew for sure that it was him. Well, why was that? Well, it's because he had a new body that was different than the body he had had before. And Jesus in his resurrected body was still the same person, yet different and transformed from what they had seen previously. And in Jesus' resurrection body, we have a picture of what our bodies are going to be like when we are someday raised from the dead, and of what the whole earth is going to be like. There's going to be continuity. We will still be ourselves. The earth will still be the earth. But both are going to be transformed, to be made like Christ, to be made the fullness of what they were originally intended to be. And that is the hope that we get to look forward to. That means that the world we see around us that right now has so much brokenness and hurt is not the final story. Jesus' victory over Satan is eternal and complete. Satan is going to be utterly frustrated in his designs. His desire was to take human beings and to take the earth away from God. But what we see in Jesus Christ and his resurrection is the announcement that Satan has been defeated, that all those whose faith is in Jesus Christ are going to be saved. They are going to be made new. They are going to be made whole, and they are going to dwell with Jesus Christ in heaven forever. And in the same way that when we as human beings fell, all of the earth fell with us, right? All of the earth was affected by our sin. When Jesus comes back, the whole earth is going to be made new once again, so that even there, Satan has no opportunity for victory. So what we see in Revelation 21 is a series of different pictures of what it's going to be like when that day of new creation comes. Jesus' resurrection is the first fruits, and we await the day when it comes in its fullness, and here it is. We see one image of being a great city. This is going to be the city coming down out of heaven to earth, where there's going to be the new Jerusalem, where God's people, the church, dwell with him. Jesus said that he is the water of life, and we see that in this new temple area and throughout the city, there is this river filled with the water of life from which people can drink and never be thirsty again. We see that there's not going to be a need for a temple, Because the glory and presence of God is going to be so powerful that wherever you go, there will be this manifest sense that God is there. In a sense, we won't even need a sun because everything we will see in the light of Christ. In other words, you won't be able to look at a tree, you won't be able to look at another person, you won't be able to look at a river, anything, without being conscious of Jesus Christ in that moment, because he himself will be the light through which we see everything else around us. We see a place where sin is finally defeated, and so all of the effects of sin are defeated. There's no more death. There is no more pain. All of those things that sin has brought into the world have now lost their power to hurt and to harm. There's going to be a tree of life. In fact, one of the things you can notice is all kinds of imagery that corresponds to the opening chapters of Genesis, as the original creation of Eden is now made new and even better in this great city that God is going to be creating. And once again, we see that in heaven there is going to be the throne of God on which God sits, and where we, his children, will get a chance to look into his face. And more than that, we will actually get to reign with him over the earth, just as he originally intended. God's plan for Adam was that he would rule the earth on God's behalf. That purpose that God originally had back in Genesis 2 will not be thwarted by Satan. And that's what we as human beings will eventually do when God comes back in his fullness. We live today in an incredibly pessimistic age. As we are now coming toward the end of our book of Revelation, I think this is a great time in your connection groups to sit and talk about the hope that we have. When we are surrounded by so much pessimism about where our country is going and where our world is going, one of the things that should be characteristic of us as Christians is hope. Because however bad things may get, we have an unshakable confidence that God is going to take this broken and messed up world, filled with all of the hurt and oppression and injustice and sickness and death that it has, and he is going to make that right. He is going to have a complete victory over all of those things, and we as his children get to be with him in all of his glory forever. I think in our connection groups we need to talk about how we can cultivate that sense of hope and expectation so that it becomes one of the most evident things about us is that we are hopeful people because our hearts have been captured by what God has in store for us in the age to come.